We are going to get started because we want to make sure we have enough time for each of the panelists and to have an engaging Q&A part of today's meeting. So thank you all for coming. I just introduced myself in Navajo, sharing my clans, that I am Anglo-American on my mother's side and born for the Towering House clan and the Black Streaked Woods people of the Navajo. And my name is Farina King, and I am a history assistant professor here at NSU. And this is my first time on campus, and so coming here, it was, of course, very eye-opening, and I was taken back by a lot of the discussion, not just here, about Indian mascots and how it relates personally and as well locally to the history of NSU's mascot once being the Redman and changed to the Riverhawk about 11 years ago. But it was an issue I grew up with as being white and Navajo, and living in the Washington, D.C. area, where the national football team, NFL team, was the name as well of that team. And growing up as a Native American, not really understanding the significance of that name, and for a long time, not being bothered by it, not even thinking about that issue. And it wasn't later until life that I realized I was living with a lot of myth and a lot of distorted understanding of my own family, myself, my heritage, that I really started to explore the history of settler colonialism in our country, and connecting the dots with experiences with my family. And that's something that inspired me to help organize this panel with the Center for Tribal Studies and with the American Indian Heritage Committee. That I could tell these conversations are important. We hope this panel is a beginning, a starter. There are many different perspectives and different vintage points to what Indian mascots mean to people and our own personal backgrounds and personal histories connected to them. But this is from a personal issue to a local one, to a national one, and even on a global level. So very significant to have these conversations, and that we hope to continue having them into the year and bringing in different perspectives and narratives with that. And so I appreciate everyone who has come. We do have a class with Dr. V, who asked me to point out that there is a sign-in. Make sure to sign in to receive credit for her class here at the front. You'll find that. Okay, and I will quickly by name introduce our panelists, but they will have time more to go in depth with their personal introduction and how they each relate to this issue and the questions of Indian mascots. Is there an Indian mascot issue? What is the issue? That's what they're being asked to reflect on, to consider, to address. And why does it matter? Why is it something to talk about? What does it mean, especially in the context of NSU, of Tahlequah? How has it affected our university, our communities, and our local surrounding areas and interconnected communities as well? These are the questions that the panelists have been posed to address, and they will each have time to directly address us, and then we will leave the remaining time to allow conversation between the panelists and with anyone here who wishes to engage as well with the conversation. So up at the front we have Dr. Kimberly Lee, who is in the English department, and Donnie Squirrel, who is a community member, works for the Cherokee Nation, and then Dr. Rachel Green, who is in education here at NSU, and as well as Ani Christie, who is a current NSU student. And so we will also have another panelist coming in. Don't mind coming through, and if you can go to the back on the side for those, I'll give you some time to find a spot, you can move to the back so you don't block our exit way. Thank you. But we will have Jacob Chavez, who is also a current NSU student, join us as he's rushing from class over here, and he's the current president of the Native American Student Association here at NSU. First, we'll hear from Dr. Kimberly Lee, and as I told them, I warned them, I am going to be pretty serious about the time limit here, and I'll give them some forewarning before having to ask them to conclude. So thank you, Dr. Kimberly Lee. We'll let you begin.
Apetu washte, mitakuyapi, michante washte nanapi triazapu. Lakota imachiapi, mato ishnalawen, naa washichu imachiapi, Kimberly Lee. I'm happy to greet you here today in Tsalagi territory, and I want to thank the Cherokee people for the honor of working with their people on their land. I'm an associate professor here in English in the Department of Languages and Literatures. My fields of study, research, and teaching include Native American writing, rhetoric, and literature. I do work in women's studies and in film and media. I've been here for 7 years, and I hope to have another great 7 years down the line. When I was first asked to do this, I was hesitant to sign on to this because this has been an issue that I've been talking about in my classes, actually, and with anyone who will listen for about the last 15 years. It's amazing to me that this issue has had the longevity that it has without any real, shall we say, denouement, without any real untying. Some things I have to say about mascots is I think one of the worst things they do is relegate Native people to the past. You don't see a Native mascot as a modern person, right? They're all from the 1800s or 1700s. And I think that's a real problem among the many. They reinforce stereotypes that Native people have struggled and worked so hard to dispel. Yet every day, these stereotypes get reinforced through the media and other venues. They diminish and disrespect Native voices. These kinds of mascots reinforce and support racist ideas about Native people. They impinge on Native sovereignty and self-determination. And they're just really white fantasies couched in the talk of honor and respect. But truthfully, they're really a means to discount Native peoples as human beings. So I feel like when we have these discussions, sometimes they're fraught with emotion because people will say, but my team, my high school team was the Warriors, whatever. And what's wrong with that? Warriors could be anyone. Well, okay, I can give you that, but what does your mascot look like? What kind of warrior are we talking about? And therein lies the problem, because we all know what that's going to turn out to be, right? And it's always going to be the guy in the headdress, right? That's always who we're talking about. There's going to be some feathers, there's going to be some buckskin, there's going to be the same old stereotypes that we see in movies and TV even today. So I would hope that you came here today with an open heart and open mind to sort of talk about these things without making, a snap judgment. But over the long haul, I think you'll find that Native people are the only race who get this kind of treatment, and especially in America, used as sports mascots. I can think of no other racial people that get this treatment. And there's a reason for that. And as I said, most of this is to support racist ideas about Native people. So with that, I'm going to slide it over to Donnie and let Donnie have some things to say.
Okay. I hope I speak loud enough. Ani kawi yigi ginewudi digwenasa don salo dawado. I introduced myself in the way that we see ourselves in our communities, or we used to, by my clan first, where I come from, and my name third, because I fit not so much as an individual, but as an individual within a community context always. And so my name is Donnie Squirrel, and I have been enrolled here, and I will be enrolled again. Almost through with my bachelor's degree, and I've spent a lot of time here, and I always feel very excited when I come into this building. This building was built by our people, Cherokee people, for women over 100 years ago. We were innovative and progressive people then. It was the first institution for women west of the Mississippi. So we are progressive people, and we value education. And I think a lot of what this issue comes down to is education. Education versus ignorance. Ignorance doesn't have to have such a negative connotation. It just simply means we just don't know. We just don't know any better until we are schooled. And so I was one of the people when this issue first came about, 20 years ago, maybe longer even, and thought, oh, there are so many other issues. There's poverty, there's drug use, abuse in our communities. There are all these things we need to address. Why are we dealing with this? And what I found was, I grew up in a Native community. I grew up in a Cherokee community. But you don't really study that. You just live it. And you don't question anything. You just go through it. But when you come to get an education, you start questioning those things. You start studying. You start asking questions, about identity. And I think that's what another thing this comes down to is identity. How we see ourselves and how others see us. Because this issue is not just external, other people and their perceptions of us. I think what's very important is how we perceive ourselves as well in this. How do we view ourselves? Because again, I grew up in a community in our school. We were the Kenwood Indians, and it went to the 8th grade. And again, there were the images, the symbolic images of what a Native looks like. Many times a Plains style, Plains look in that symbolism. And we're Cherokee. We're from here. What it tells me is, what do we know about ourselves? What is lacking? And we're in an educational system, where we're supposed to really study those things and understand those things about us, if those things are in place. And so I've really thought on this. And so I really changed my mind on that as I began studying Native people, studying our history, that identity and how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us is central to this issue, because people simply don't know, and we don't know. And so problems come about then when we don't understand ourselves. All the issues I mentioned, drug abuse, all of that. How are we going to solve those problems? Well, I think we have to have a strong sense of self and identity. I think we have to know who we are and where we come from internally, not how other people tell us, and not what they tell us to believe, and not what they show us and say, this is who you are, this is what you should believe about yourself. And when you become an awakened person regarding your history, your culture, your language, your place in the world, you want to protect it. When you really truly understand how precious your identity is and where you come from and what your people fought for to just simply get you here and keep and stay alive to keep you here. I pray to my ancestors every day and thank them every day and say, I hope I make you proud, and I hope we carry on in the way that you intended for us. And so when you understand that about yourself and your people, you want to protect it. And you want other people to understand you. When you have that sense of self, that strong sense of self identity as a Native person, as a Native woman, you want other people to understand that better as well. And so then you're surrounded by this imagery that just is so incorrect and so disrespectful. And I understand people love sports in this country. And so many of the sports in this country are based upon Native games, so there's some irony there. Football, basketball, we as a Native people have always loved sports and competition to some degree. Not competition like we see today, but where people are left behind and there's a last place and things like that. But we love the idea of getting together in terms of it being really a community fellowship kind of a thing in terms of our sports. And so I think about these issues of identity. I think about these issues of identity, that there are issues that it's not just at the national level, and this may be controversial, but it's at the state level, it's at the local level, even tribal. Sometimes we simply don't understand how that imagery is so very wrong, the symbolism of the name of a school. Even Kenwood Indians, I'm so proud to be from Kenwood, but it wasn't until later and I started studying that imagery of the kind of cartoonish Native characters that represented us that I went, wow, I grew up with that, and it was so very wrong. We're 99% Cherokee enrollment here in this little school, and that's not a Cherokee representation there. And even the very term Indian is not ours. That's an imposed term that Columbus gave us when he got lost and said, well, they look like the people of India, maybe. So that's not our term either. That's not our original name for ourselves. So as Cherokee people even, Cherokee is not our original name for ourselves. It's Ani Kaduwagi. That was a name that we're told was given to us by the Creator, and it means to rise above as a people. And that's what we do, and I think that's what we're trying to do here too, is just keep having, have a respectful conversation, talk about ideas, reach consensus, educate. That's the best way to go. In my mind, I'm not. Protesting is kind of a last resort for me, which is really unusual because I can be very hot-headed. But diplomacy, talks, is a good way to start. But sometimes you have to get people's attention too, and for an issue. And so, ultimately, what I would like to see happen is just that there are no more Native mascots on any level. And ideally, it would be nice if people did that themselves rather than it having to be legislated. And so that's why I'm excited to be here, because we're simply just having a discussion. I understand people, I'm talking about our identity, but people tie their identity to place and experiences too. My dad was a red man. He graduated from here in the 70s, but he literally was a red man. He is Cherokee. And in our prayers and in our understanding of our identity, we pray to the four races of man, for the well-being of the four races of man. And red represents Native people. And he's a man, and he graduated from here. So red man actually fit him, but it probably didn't fit everyone in school at that time, and even up to the point that mascot went away. But he has nostalgia about it. He has strong feelings about it. And I think it had its place and its time. But then people come together and say, you know what, we may need to do something different. And I know that was a difficult change. Change always is. Change always is. But sometimes we have to make those changes. Again, as Dr. Kimberly Lee said, we are the only race that has to deal with mascot issues. It's not African Americans, it's not Caucasians, and it's not Asians. You know, you just don't see the mascots attached to them. It's us, and we need to figure out why and what we're going to do about it.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to be the first person not to speak to you in my tribal native tongue. One reason I actually, biologically, I'm from the Spotted Horse Chief from the Pawnee, around Pawnee, Oklahoma. I was adopted into a Cherokee family. So the majority of my life I thought I was completely Cherokee, and it turns out I'm just 1/8 Cherokee. I'm actually half Pawnee. So those are the kinds of things that do happen in life and change who you thought you were. But that points out the fact that there's not just one tribe, and while people are choosing mascots, they're, I think, looking at Indians as just one universal, you know, pan-native tribe, and that's not true. Just like each of you are individuals. There's many, many, many tribes. And so, to me, that's important that we also see that as part of the issue. I also, in 1996, when I graduated here with my master's, it was Redmond, and I saw the change take place since I've been working here. I think that it was the right thing to do. As you can kind of guess on the panel, we're on, you know, one side, and maybe later we could have a community member meeting where we have both sides presented, or you may have some good questions on that. But I think one of the things that we discussed was the fact that the community probably didn't get enough say when the name was changed from Redmond to Riverhawk. And this is kind of how this idea was started, that maybe we should start having some discussions. Because, you know, I was here when every other yard had, you know, re-elect Redmond, and I understood the passion for nostalgia. I'm old. Nostalgia is just perfect for me. So, you know, I do well understand that. But I also understand that words have more than just, you know, they have more of an emotional impact, and we need to pay attention to that. Like Donnie, I also really felt the very first time this issue was presented to me that we have adolescent suicide rates that are horrendous. We have diabetes, we have poverty, we have so many issues. Why are we focusing on this one thing? And so I have to give credit where credit is due, even though I don't always agree with him on everything. Chad Smith came to my 9th grade class and presented a short film that was full of mascots and cartoons and words, and I didn't even realize that the only bad guy in Five Goes West is our natives, you know, and I was like, oh my gosh. But what I realized is before I was even 10 years old, I had seen so many of these things, and that they had affected me whether I was consciously aware or not. And I admitted something this last week for the first time, and someone said to include it, and so y'all can yell at me later because I find it embarrassing. I'm so old that there used to be a commercial that said, "Ugh, you need 'em tires?" And when I was in 2nd grade, my mother actually dressed me with a shawl, and she had put those words on the back of the shawl, and I did trick-or-treating that year that way. And now I look back at that and I'm horrified. But what it tells me is there's been a change. My mother was always, you know, respectful of her native blood. But I think now she would sit back and go, okay, that wasn't respectful. That was not understanding what message that sent to me. You know, because I just took it as a joke. Well, being native is not a joke. That's the bottom line. So The other day, I had a reason to actually make this kind of into a speech for something else, and I'm just going to read you a paragraph. I just said, Chief Chad Smith changed my mind. He came to my class of 9th grade Native students and shared with us examples of cartoons, commercials, media, pictures, and yes, names that all of us had experienced before we were even teenagers. The negativity was overwhelming. The Native Americans in cartoons were drunk and stupid. The advertising showed disrespectful images. The movie clips showed aggressive, convenient mass enemies. All of this I had experienced, and it was shaped the image of who I was before I was even able to construct my own identity. Looking back, I realized that it took years to overcome these ideas and realized that I could be successful and proud as a Native woman. So now I know that there is power to names. A name can injure. A name can destroy. A name can infect us every moment of every day without our even realizing it. And then I worked at Sequoia and I realized I don't want this generation of Native youth to be having that experience. We have choices. And I think if I talked to any of you and said, okay, I'm getting ready to talk to my kids, should I give them a negative image or a positive image? I think all of you would say, let's give them a positive image. And I think that's where we back up here and say, oh, but our mascots are not doing that. They're absolutely not doing that. And I agree with Dr. Lee. It also represents the past. It's not looking at the present. I worked in Corpus Christi. I had 7th graders come to me and go, what are you? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you said you're not white, you're not black, you're not Hispanic, and you're not Asian. Those are your choices right there. That's it. And I said, well, I'm Native American. And they, to a kid, said, no, they don't exist anymore. And I said, well, go up a state, and there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with you. But if you think about those kids down there in Corpus Christi, where were they seeing anything that had to do with Native Americans? It was going to be in sports mascots. And it was going to be things from the past. It was not talking about what natives are doing and accomplishing today. How well, we are doing in education. How well tribes are actually working as sovereign governments. They weren't learning that. They were thinking this was all in the past. I will say that to me it is absolutely a child self-esteem issue. For me, it is absolutely coming back to the fact that we are losing way too many Native youth, and I will fight for that as long as I possibly can. And one of the things that we need to do in that vein is to support them and give them positive role models, not go backwards and give them negatives. Even if you don't understand, and I'm going to pull from somebody in the room here, Renee and I have had this discussion. We have a friend named Jocelyn, and Renee one time made a comment, and Jocelyn said, I don't like that. Renee said, I didn't have to understand it. I just knew she didn't like it, and I had to respect that. And that's part of being in other people's shoes, which I hope all of us have that experience of trying to see something from another perspective. And I'll pass things on.
Okay.
My name's Ani Christie. Well, I would say that I'm pretty blessed. I was raised by a full-blood Cherokee man, so I knew my tradition when I was growing up. I knew stomp dance. I come from, if you don't know what a stomp dance is, it's our version of church. So, and my family that I was around, that my dad stayed around, was the same. And some of them are in this room today. And we grew up knowing our culture, so with the mascot, it is pretty sad. And yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, well, so when I joined the Army, I was active duty for, I felt like most of my adult life, and I just moved back last year. And my time in the Army, I was around people from all over America. And because of the mascots, they think every Indian lives in Oklahoma, hunts buffalo, and lives in teepees because of the mascots and what they learn in school. And like me wearing my uniform, they're like, are you allowed to wear that? Can you wear that? Are you allowed to listen to music? And it's just crazy to think. I felt like I was an alien. I'm like, this is my land. You're the foreigner. You know? But that's the view that they get. And I even traveled around the world, like I was in Afghanistan. And like one time I was speaking with one of them, the local nationals, and they're like, what are you? They spoke Spanish to me because with us being over in other countries, they actually pick up some of our stuff. And a lot of them speak Spanish now, which is pretty cool. And so they came and spoke Spanish to me. I'm like, oh, I'm not Hispanic, I'm native. And they're like, what is that? And then when I explained it to them, they're like, oh, we thought y'all guys were all dead. And when I went to other countries, I realized that's what they think. They think that we're just extinct. And I was like, wow, that's insane to see what the rest of the world sees us. I'm like, no, we're still here and we're still alive. I'm like, you're looking at me right now. I was like, we survived and we're still here. And I went to South Korea, and that's the only country where they actually learn better history than we do. They know more about our struggles, what our ancestors went through, than students in America. And I think that's very sad. But it's very prideful to know that at least other country knows about us. And you know, they're like, told me, they're like, yeah, it's very sad. We hear about your history and we're very saddened for y'all. And I just think it's pretty cool that they know that. But the biggest thing is I don't understand how, well, because the mascots, they put them as Plains Indians, but everyone claims Cherokee. A Cherokee is a woodland Indian. We don't hunt buffalo. We never hunted buffalo. We never lived in teepees. We stayed in one spot. So that's one of the biggest confusions for me is like, how do they get Cherokees and Plains Indians? We're not the same. I mean, we're the same, but not the same at the same time. Every tribe is very unique, which is very awesome. So with the mascots, this is an important issue to me. So whenever I was asked to be on the panel, I took it immediately because like this past weekend, I don't know if anyone saw with Fort Gibson. I was like, y'all seen that? I was like, so to me, not only us having mascots, but then it gives the other people the opportunity to bash us, you know, because they're fighting that school. Like, oh, beat the Panthers, but instead it's beat the Indians or beat the Savages or whatever they want to call us, and then they destroy us. And that's not okay. Like, our ancestors were murdered and slaughtered. It'd be like us doing a parade and making fun of the Jews that were slaughtered. I was like, that's not okay. And it's sad that in America that they say it is okay, and it's not okay. Well, I think that's what I got right now. I feel very passionate about it.
Yeah, thank you. Jacob.
Siona Gata. Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Chavez. Forgive me for being a little late. I just got out of class. But just to kind of start off, I'm president of the Native American Student Association here on campus. Just to kind of echo what's been said throughout the panel, you know, I think this kind of plays a big role as far as like subconsciously or maybe even consciously for Native American youth. I graduated from Sequoia High School, just down the road. Our mascot is the Indians, but we are an all-native school, so there's some, you know, I don't know, conflict there, I don't know, but I didn't really see it as that in high school because I was surrounded by Native American students, so I didn't think anything of it, but you know, just last year, I'm surprised that this happened at Fort Gibson because last year we had Coweta High School do the same thing with their parade float. It was like send them home or whatever, or like the OSU thing.
Scouts and Indians.
Yeah, scout the Indians. And then OSU, just a few years ago, they said send them home on the Trail of Tears kind of thing. So I'm surprised that stuff like this keeps happening, especially locally. Coweta's like an hour, and Fort Gibson's like 20 minutes down the road. So I'm very surprised that things like that happen. But things like that kind of make me think of my brother. He's soon to be 8 years old. Growing up in like a school system, the elementary school he's in now is the Cherokee Elementary, just down the road. Their mascot is the Braves, but they don't depict the brave. It's just the word they use. But when I was going to school there in elementary, they had a mascot, like an Indian with a feather and like a hatchet, things like that. But when you're that age, you don't really think how that depicts you as a person. As you grow up, you kind of learn your identity. I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen, but I'm also a San Felipe Pueblo, and so Pueblos are located out in the New Mexico, Arizona area. That's totally different from Cherokees who come from the east and who are now here in Oklahoma. When you see people depicted as a Plains Indian, like generally it's just kind of that is you and you're objectified kind of thing. Like you are someone's tool to advertise or something. Washington Redskins or Kansas City Chiefs or things like this kind of bring you into a picture of like that identity is taken from you and broadcasted to people who see it as something fun like Tomahawk Chop or a song they sing like the Florida Seminoles do. Things like that can have an effect on you. I wasn't brought up culturally, so when I saw things like that, I thought, maybe these places were just trying to, do their own thing and have a little, trademark. But, these things weren't given to these organizations or institutions. They were just kind of used and then kind of evolved whenever, people had an outcry like this as far as mascots. They would change, alter a little bit, but they wouldn't completely, sedate any kind of hard feelings that people would have. So growing up without culture, I think that kind of gave me a unique perspective because I grew up kind of like, I always akin it to growing up in two worlds for Native Americans. If you're different nationalities, I'm half Native American, half white. I grew up, predominantly in white culture, like social media and things like that. I didn't grow up knowing language or ceremony or anything like that. So once I started to discover things like that, you kind of have to learn to switch gears, whichever area you're in. When you're with Cherokee people, you kind of talk about history and things like that, Trail of Tears, and the games that we play now, like stickball and marbles and other games that we do. And you kind of try to have to change the way you think almost, because that hasn't changed since we were here. Like that's always been that mindset. That mindset's always been the same. It's always been like about the community, about how we want to carry on with future generations. But when it comes to white culture, it's kind of always evolving. It's always taking on new forms, and it adapts to whatever culture is present. So I mean that kind of brings in different ideas, kind of like a melting pot of things. So when you're switching gears in between those two worlds, it kind of gets hard and you're conflicted because you think about how the white culture has changed your culture and how its effect has brought it into your community and your family, because we lost everything, and then just to slowly kind of crawl back to getting where we can actually do ceremony and have our language and build schools dedicated to language. That kind of shows our stake in things. But when people forget about who you are and forget that you even exist, like people that do these things like on the warpath or Tomahawk Chop, they don't know that these people are still here, and maybe they hear things and see things on the news, like just recently, like you upset some high school student and then things get a little heavy for a little while, but then when things calm down, it seems like it's all forgotten and things are kind of forgiven. You just kind of forgive and forget, and things happen again. Because I remember it was 2 years ago, I was volunteering at the Heritage Center during holiday, and that's kind of a lucrative point for Cherokee Nation because that brings in a lot of revenue, but also it brings in tourists from out of state. And I was working at the front gate, and we were handing out bags, selling bags to the customers coming in. And I walk up to this car, and where I was standing, I was just wearing regular clothes, like a t-shirt and some pants, and then down the way they had the workers who worked in the village that were wearing like buckskin and things like that. I walk up to this car, and it's this old white woman, and she cracks the window. She doesn't roll it down all the way. And I asked her, I had a sales pitch going for the bag, and I was like, "Hello, miss. Like, would you want to buy this bag? Well, it has all this information about all this stuff." And then she stopped. She raised her hand. She stopped me mid sentence, and she didn't look at me. She just kept looking forward. And she's like, "I want to see your real ID." And so what she wanted was to drive 10 feet to my left and get out of the car and take a selfie with this man wearing buckskin, who, you know, he has a, that's his day job, but when he goes home at night, he wears, you know, regular clothes. He goes to Walmart, you know, like, he goes to Walmart and he watches TV just like the rest of us. But what they think is, like, when they come here, like, we live in that village, like, that's where we're from. Like, that is where it all starts for us. So I think things like this educate, you know, America and the world at large kind of things. We come back like to change this Redmond to Riverhawk. I mean, I was like 2007, right? I was 10. I was in like middle school. My mom was here, and so like I didn't think much of it at the time. You know, I thought it was just, you know, an advertisement thing. But I'm a third generation NSU student. My grandma was here, and my dad was here, and they graduated as Redmond, and I graduated as Riverhawk, which my grandma and my dad don't hold any kind of animosity to the name change. It's just something, but I think that it's very important to kind of voice a concern, especially to a derogatory name like Redskin or Redmond. It's just kind of, you know, it's not okay. It kind of, because being where we are in the industry, uniquely, like starting out as a Cherokee Female Seminary, I think that it says a lot to how industry sees its students, and the name change was positive. It was a positive thing because we represent like 30% of the student population here. So I think the name change was a good thing, and I think that making up a certain population of America should be within, you know, bounds to change the football organization's name or some weird ceremony that people want to do at their high school football game. I think that's perfectly, you know, reasonable for something like that to happen. And I mean, we're just having a conversation about it, but I think we all are on the same side, on the same page that, you know, these things have negative effects as far as like suicide rates and kind of your confidence being a student coming onto campus. Like NSU advertises, you know, this big, you know, Native American population kind of thing, and we come here and like it's kind of like, you know, speaking frankly, like you don't see a lot of Native American students are involved. I mean, we have NASA and ACES and student organizations alike, but you don't really see its big presence here. Like they teach it in intro classes, university strategies, but then it's kind of like this is how it started and this is where we are now. And I think the same echoes throughout the country. It's kind of like the Europeans came over, they invaded, kind of almost genocided the whole people and different cultures, and some are extinct. And so like the ones that we have now, I think should be like the stake in the whole thing is that they exist and they're still here, and that, you know, we should respect these cultures, like as far as academia or like just as people, for football organizations to high schools and things like that. Like I think throughout America we should have these you know, these areas of, like, we should have state representation that's positive for us. You know, I think that, you know, I mean, it's kind of touchy with, you know, we had Standing Rock, and then Trump kind of just let that happen. You know, just kind of pushed for that to happen. So I think that these mascots are as comical as they seem for some people, and as like low on the bar as our issues as far as America is concerned, I think it is still pretty vital. Like I feel like that could be the domino that kind of tips everything into place. If you change this, then the rest will follow, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Thank you.
Thanks. I
everyone.
mean, I would just
Go ahead,
add
Dr.
one thing. Sorry.
Sure. No.
Part of our discussion started because several of you are probably aware last year the off-campus bookstore was selling Redmond shirts with a caricature of a very negative caricature of a Native person on it. And I went there, I know Sarah went there, several people in the room went over and asked them to stop. And it was interesting. I went in and one person wanted to help me, and by the time I had discussed politely with people, I had 6 people standing at the counter with me. And of course their argument was the alumni want them. And I'm like, okay. So I went over and came to our campus and talked with people here. And what they had done was they had used NSU, and they had used the way we actually use our font. So it was something that we could do something about, because that was something we had the rights to. On the other hand, in our bookstore, Barnes & Noble, last year, and this year is supposed to be the last year, we'll be selling Redmond shirts. They do not have a picture on them, but they are Redmond shirts. I feel like it's fairly hypocritical that we have them here, and yet we want to stop them there. I feel like both places should respect and realize that this is an issue. But I do know it's also a controversial issue. I mentioned this in class this morning, and I had one student turn to me and go, "They're selling Redmond shirts this week?" And so I realized
to go get it.
I messed it up, even by letting them know. So, sorry.
No, definitely. Yes.
Are these old shirts, like they had back in storage, or did they have them redone?
Last year they bought them, and they were new last year. After the controversy took place with the off-campus bookstore, they did pull them back, their hats and their caps. What I was told when I inquired this summer was that there's still $2,000 worth of merchandise over there, which could be sold for $4,000. Or NSU would lose the $2,000 to Barnes & Noble. So it has stayed with, there's not a resolution. So my understanding is this is the last time it's supposed to happen, but that they still plan on selling them this week.
So thank you so much to our panelists. I think they bring up a lot of shared issues and common themes here. One is, how do we understand mascots in the context of histories of settler colonialism, a history that dates back to the encounters from Columbus, right, bringing in this concept of Indian and these terms and ideas that come in that, and then the historical developments, ones that are especially violent when there are struggles over land, that these lands in North America were not virgin soil, they were not wilderness, but they were homelands and still are homelands to many indigenous peoples. But then they become homelands to other diverse peoples who come, following the Columbian Exchange and these different exchanges from that time in history. So why does this matter, right, is legacies of not just settler colonialism, but also of conquests, of removals, of violence that were a part of those histories. And they're still, in many ways, open wounds. Many ways that, even just today, even in my own family, in Navajo land, and even in my own interaction with people, I've met people who say, "I don't understand. You're saying you're Native American and you have a PhD? That doesn't make sense. What are you doing here, at a university?" And they are surprised that, or I'm labeled as not real. I'm not a real Native American. I'm inauthentic. And that, as motioned and referred to by our panelists, they also have had these similar experiences. Many Natives have, because there's this construction, an idea of an authentic Indian is a dead Indian. Referring to Cherokee writer Thomas King's book, The Inconvenient Indian, where he lays out these differences between ideas of a dead Indian, those are the ones in the past, frozen in time, who were seen as a part of the wilderness to be conquered and controlled for the uplift of an American democracy in the United States. But these issues still remain as referred to the standoff between Standing Rock Sioux and the Dakota Access Pipeline, which has now initiated and mobilized many indigenous peoples coming together. These terms also change. They're appropriated and embraced by some indigenous peoples. The Seminole tribal nation in Florida has agreed, used their indigenous sovereignty to agree with Florida State University to use their name as the mascot, as well as the Utes with the University of Utah. But does that make it acceptable? What can we do about that? When you have schools here in Oklahoma with over 50% of the students being Native American, and such as the different schools referred to today within 20 miles of NSU, and you have the youth there dressing up, playing Indian, that it becomes a mystic, romanticized, fairy-like character, and they are playing Indian, being caged, saying cage the Indians against their rival. What messages are we conveying, and how do people relate to that? Even Native Americans. As I said, I grew up in a very predominantly non-Native area, even though I have strong ties to my family in a predominantly Native area, Navajo country. And I grew up calling myself Indian Princess. I grew up seeing Pocahontas and absorbing those images and thinking that's what it meant to be Indian, until I started to interact with my relatives and even hear about the disparities, the struggles that they face, and learning more about my own history and my own father's, that he was sent to boarding school when he was 5 years old. And it is an emotional subject about how people say, focus on the issues, the poverty and that, but they are ignored. They are erased and suppressed because the image that people think of Indians is of a red face, or one that has been referred to as a scalp. The red skin, that's what it is connected to. And even if it is made fun of or made light of, and even when natives embrace it, it is connected to those other meanings too. And there are layers of meaning and how people relate to it. But yes, let's come together as community to move forward, make a better future for our children, so that we are not silencing natives today, and also how so many of us have natives in our ancestry, no matter how far it goes back in the interactions we have. Be accountable and responsible for the land we occupy, for this land we all share, and in our occupation of it, and recognizing these different relationships in it. All right. Thank you, Ahehet, for coming. Do we have insights, comments that you all, any questions for the panelists that you'd like to share and bring up at this time? Yes, I saw you first, and then
That's
over
fine.
there. Yeah, sir.
I just want to bring up my race kind of had the same issue. I'm not going to mention my race. I'm not allowed to, because we're not allowed, because we're seen as mystic creatures. We're fortune tellers. I'm a gypsy. Mm-hmm. So I understand, we don't have gypsy mascots, but we do have the same issue with the media portraying gypsies as fortune-telling thieves or scandals or murderers or all these bad things. In Europe, it's more on the non-mythical side. We're just all thieves who steal and are poor. Like, in Europe, they would say, you can't be a gypsy. You got a student while you're in college. Like, that's, I understand where you're coming from. I'm also 1/16 Cherokee, but I don't count it because my great-grandfather reneged being a Cherokee to join the Air Force. He said he wasn't because back when he was alive, you couldn't be a Cherokee in the Air Force.
Well, even as he was referring to, in my U.S. history classes, I'm teaching about, racial histories of race, and it's not, just Native Americans and how they're treated. There are different ways that media has done blackface or been a part of manipulating different ways that different races are portrayed, and why do they do that? What is in the power of controlling and shaping that is questions that come up. Did you, can I move to the next question? Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Growing up in Telford, I think one of the most important factors that you guys touched on was education, to overcome some of the stereotypes and everything. One of the things that I came here to learn and hear about was the Redmond change. With your father, I am a Redmond. And so I wanted to learn and open up about that. One of the things that touched me, though, that I wanted to talk to you about and ask, because people in my family is going to be mad at me because we are huge OU Sooner fans in my family. I am probably more upset with some of my family supporting OU Sooners with their history of where being a Sooner came from than at times what I am about being a Sequoia Indian. I think at times that we do not talk about that either. And we completely override the fact that we're giving OU millions of dollars. Native Americans are. I have a friend who creates Native American attire with Cherokee Nation syllabary on it. And we're not talking about what that history of their mascot and everything is. So that's my statement.
It's on my list.
It's on my list.
I laughingly say, that I support Crimson and Cream. That's how I choose to say it, because that's where I received my bachelor's. But in my classes, all my students will walk away knowing that, I'm never going to, when someone says boomer, I'm never going to be responding with Sooner. And we talk about what is a Sooner. So we come back and we end up with, they're the ones that cheated. They're the ones that jumped the land run. So first of all, we have a land run, and then we have a second layer of they were the ones that cheated. So, that is, I do realize that David Boren came along and decided to rebrand what a Sooner was a while back and say that, well, they were just innovative and they were forward thinking. Yeah. But in the state of Oklahoma, I don't think that's going to matter. We know what a Sooner is. So I guess in my mind, I can support Crimson and Cream when there's, but on the other hand, that is not going to be a term that I'm going to use because I know what it means.
Yeah, and that was, when we talk about the Sooners, that was Cherokee land, so that is specific to Cherokee history.
Absolutely.
So we had to deal with the Trail of Tears, okay? So stolen land once. We get here, we're promised new lands, Indian territory. Well, then that is stolen. So we're talking, so this is deeply personal. So that land is stolen. So the Sooners, as as has been mentioned, they were the cheaters. They were the ones that did not wait to steal the land. They got out there and they were ready. So I know people love the Sooners. That is that's religion here in Oklahoma. Next to Christianity, and then there's the Sooners. Sometimes the Sooners, and then I don't know. And I may need a police escort out of here. But at least no. I'm not saying don't like OU football, but at least let's talk about where these names come from and that imagery comes from.
My sociology professor told me one time that he thought that football was taking the place of religion because it used to be when you came to any town you saw a church steeple first, but when you came to Norman,
No.
It's
the football stadium.
I think we have. Yes.
Go ahead. So back on what you said with OU, I find that interesting because it seems like you have the Cowboys and you have the Sooners. So behind the education of what the Sooner is, most natives don't want to be a Cowboy, so they go with Sooners. That also played into a school I chose to go into law school. I didn't want to be a Sooners. No disrespect. I mean, I have lots of family. Again, my family will be mad at me for saying we're here down, but it's the name that it goes back to. Also do outreach, and it's very interesting. We went up to a community school and was teaching. So we had a cultural day, and we brought stickball and pottery, baskets, different things like that. But before we got there to set up. All the kids were out there doing a land run. They had wagons dressed. I mean, they'd go all out for these little wagons, and it was just ironic that we had to get there to see that. But needless to say, that school didn't do that again. So, next year, after after,
Education.
after thinking about it and being frustrated, but that was, yeah.
Thank you.
In the back, sir. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
My name's Michael Bell, and I'm Pat I'm a Rapo, coming from ancient Rapos. I am from the Orange tribes, but before there was horses, because that's also an import. Okay, I used to walk buffalo down. I'm a Redskin. I graduated from Cloud High School. Their mascot is still the Redskins. We played schools like Tecumseh, the Tecumseh Savages. Miss Mary Fallon was the mayor. I'm also a Sooner. I went to school at OU for a little while. I'm also a Bison from Oklahoma Baptist University. And I want to commend everyone for their commentary. And maybe there's some other opposing views in the audience. And I want to encourage you guys to consider sharing as well, somewhere down the road, maybe not here. But this discussion needs to be had. And this dialogue is very important. And so I want to say Aho Hasa Nate Dana. Thank you all of us for what you're doing.
Thank you. And we had some comments over here. I saw one in the back, and then I'll go there. I'll start with you, and then you in there. Is that okay? All right. Yes. Go ahead.
I just would also like to thank the panel and everybody who chose to come here on their own time, and especially the people here who maybe aren't native and maybe don't have these emotional memories attached to this issue. You are here because you were curious or because you know your stance on this issue, but it's a general acceptance of ignorance in this country now. It's socially acceptable to be ignorant and to continue in your ignorance. And so I am not a native. I am Japanese. And so that was another issue with internment, and that's totally blown over in a lot of ways. So it's not just sports tradition, it's all tradition. Why do you do what you do? Do you have a reason behind what you're saying and what you're living out every day? And maybe it's okay to change, even though you have emotional memories attached to a sports team. These people have history to back up their emotions towards it. Do you have history that goes that far back that supports your sports tradition? No, you don't. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that.
So we had mentioned about money being involved, of course, and I've got a friend who works down at Florida State and has a very large endowment that is tied to the name. If the name changes, the money goes away. So I would ask back to the panel, what is the best approach when it comes to the finances that are connected to this? Is this an informed consumer boycott? Is this, how do you go about breaking those ties with Kansas City Chiefs and some of these other, which have become a brand with your history?
Yeah. You guys want to speak on that?
Well, I can say this, college teams are one thing because they're public entities. Corporate teams, that's a whole nother ballgame. And that's why it's so hard to fight them, because, the NFL makes piles of money, and that each team makes piles of money. But the irony is still, the irony of the Washington Redskins is beyond me. That is the capital of our country. That is stolen land. Yet, that's their name. And with this take a knee thing, I was completely, which is all about racism and not about the flag, I was floored that the Washington Redskins dared take a knee. It made me angry because they're using that imagery in that name, and yet they're saying they're gonna take a knee for equality and racism, and they're wearing that jersey. That's crazy. But the money issue is huge because those corporate entities can fight this in court after court after court, whereas college teams, high school teams don't have that kind of money. And so I'm not really sure why the Seminoles went along with that. because they still get misrepresented on the field, right? The guy gallops out on the horse and throws the flaming spear in the 50-yard line or whatever he does. But that wasn't Seminole culture. You know, the people there live in the swamps, and they made their life there. It's, you know, it's culturally removed from who they are. So I don't know. I guess the Seminoles can deal with that. And we got one in the room.
My name is Marcy.
Go, Marcy.
And I'm here with a member of the Seminole Nation. Now, we talked about the Seminoles being the mascot of Florida State. It makes me proud. First of all, Florida State is a winning football team. That makes me feel good. And people say, you know, but I look at the other side of the images being used for savages. This young man talked about becomes a savage. I come from Seminole, so I know where he's talking about. But, and people say, well, Marcy, how can you fight against the imagery part of those images and still support Florida State? And you talk about being in the swamps and everything, yes. The headdress we didn't wear, no, we didn't wear that. We wore turbans with the plume in the middle. That's what we wore. But, you know, maybe we need to go back and re-educate those people down there, say this is not the proper attire that we wore. And then, I don't know if anybody saw the picture of what happened at Fort Gibson, the parade they had.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that Fort Gibson was the point where the Choctaws, Chickasaws, Seminoles, Muscogee Creeks, and the Cherokees came when we were forcibly removed and we were brought from our homeland in chains, caged up just like that to Fort Gibson, because that's where they brought all the Indians from their homelands. So if that doesn't bring back memories, I don't know what does. Because it just brings back thoughts in my mind about how my ancestors were forcibly removed from Florida here in chains and caged up just like that. So those people in Fort Gibson need to be educated. The superintendent, the schools, Board of Education, they need to be educated. Whoever lives here that in Fort Gibson, that needs to be told also.
Yes.
That was very, very hurtful.
I agree.
I'm not upset with the young ladies. I have a feeling there's a lot of ignorance there. What bothers me there is the adults that allowed that to happen.
Yes.
And their response was not appropriate.
And you know, we're going to have to go, this won't be the last time. This will happen
No.
again.
Yeah, that's true.
And we're having to re-educate those who don't know any better. It's just like, you know, we get new faculty coming to NSU from out of state and how they're not familiar with the cultural environment here and the 39 tribes that live here in the state of Oklahoma. And these faculties got to be taught. You know, they got to be re-educated on cultural awareness and where we stand, what we stand for, and that we're still here. We're not dead. We're still here.
Yep.
I appreciate your insights too, that even Indian identity, you know, Indian, that concept that has so much multiple meanings and fraught meanings too, it's been embraced and it's been used for some positive movements, you know, even pan-Indianism and bringing different peoples together. And I also appreciate your insights about how it's important with the conversation, the exchange as well, that people are not completely ignoring another and having those conversations, especially around mascots. We did have someone up here waiting, and then I can jump over there. Okay.
So one comment. Well, I'm also like some people here. I graduated from, or I went to Union. I'm a Union resident. And at the time, I wasn't very educated about what happened to us as Native Americans. I was given that history lesson up until high school of what happened to how Columbus came over here and everything was all hunky-dory and whatever, and it really wasn't. I found that out when I was 28 years old, and so I went that whole time not knowing really what happened to Native Americans. Now, I know what's going on. Now I'd like to educate people. But the other night I was at a conference and I had spoke with another native, and she was talking about her friends at work were talking about having a powwow. And I was like, that's super offensive. And she was like, well, we were just talking about having a meeting. And I was like, exactly. But to me, that a powwow is not a meeting. It's it's ceremony. It's what people have. It's a celebration. It's whatever the powwow was for at that time. And she was like, well, I don't understand, why you're so upset. And I was like, well, I'm not trying to get upset, but I am trying to let you know that that's really offensive. And Dr. Green, you had mentioned that somebody was trying not to be, disrespectful to people, and I think that that's really good that people are trying to do that. But also, I was 28 years old when I found out about really what happened with us. And at this point, it's difficult as a Redskin to come back and be able to educate people in a respectful manner, because at this point it's just upsetting. First off, I didn't find that out till I was an adult, and I was taken back. So I guess my question is, what advice would you have as far as education, and how I would go from this point forward and educate people? Because I'd like to, and I like how Standing Rock gave the whole world a better perspective of us as Native Americans, and how we can come together as Indigenous people, not just Native Americans. But to add to that, when Standing Rock was over, nobody said anything. Nobody. It's gone. Where do we go from here? What advice do you have?
I think you go back to education, but first, you go back to education. My history teachers that are going to leave secondary methods are going to know what happened with Native Americans, and they're going to realize that they need to be representing more than mainstream culture in history classrooms. I'm older than you are, and I had a history book this thick, and the Trail of Tears had a whole paragraph. So we just can't allow those types of things to happen. We need to re-educate our history teachers and our future history teachers that are coming through. I think that's important. I think that, and while Standing Rock made a huge difference, I think a lot of people that weren't aware of what was going on with Native people went, wow, they're still Native people. On the other hand, this summer in Arizona, I met a lady that was thrilled that Donald Trump had signed for the pipeline to go through. She thought it was an absolutely wonderful thing. And I sat back and I said, well, do you realize what it's going to do to the water for this, for these Native people? Do you realize what we went through all the issues of what was taking place? And she said, I didn't see any of that. And so I think while we assume that everybody knows what happens at Standing Rock, we still need to be educating more people, making more people aware, politely as well as we can. Sometimes it doesn't always turn out that way, but as best we can, that there are still Native people and that their issues are still needing to be addressed.
And I think that also relates back to the money issue too, right? When people are struggling and having tensions, there's contradictions about different viewpoints of the mascot and what it means. To some people it does mean money, even in this very specific case. Yeah. It means it's translated into money. That money can be lost. But then step back and think, why is there money being invested in it? Why are people buying into the mascot? Why are they embracing it and upholding it? Do they know, all this background and the histories and its impacts on different peoples, including the negative impacts? Or are they remaining ignorant to that for different reasons? And I think, that's where it's very connected, very interconnected.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I didn't know I would get this passionate. Football is football. You cannot tell me that I think we could lose every mascot tomorrow and football is still going to make billions of dollars.
Agreed.
People are still going to watch it, and it could be done in a more respectful way.
Did you have something?
Yes, my boyfriend and I were talking about the mascot issue last night. I was trying to prepare for this, and he said, Washington Redskins, that's the top tier, and somebody, my friend Shar, my sister, clan sister, brought up earlier, dealing with it at a community level, so there's, so there's this range of where we're dealing with this, but Redskins at the top. But he said, that's in D.C. What do you think of when you think of D.C.? What do you all think of when you think of D.C.? Corruption. Shouldn't have, maybe in this country, under Obama, and this isn't really, we saw a little more diversity, but we've gone the opposite direction as of late. Let me say it that way. So we've gone back to where, and this is from a Native perspective because we see it, because we've dealt with it for so long, and I'm going to try to say it as respectfully as possible. The Caucasian male is back in charge. And what, if I were to pick a mascot for Washington, D.C., it would be a Caucasian male with money coming out of his pockets. Because that is what occurs there. They have been the decision makers for a long time. They are the people with great wealth. And so when you talk about us, when you ask a question, as Native people, what are our suggestions? You know what? We have not dealt with great wealth in our time here. We were at one time in our history, a very self-sufficient people. We didn't need outside resources at all. But we've gone to being so very, watching those budgets from Washington like everybody else. So we don't have even, I don't want to speak for everyone, but the concepts of money and business are a little bit different for us as well because, we've been in survival mode for a long time. And I think that's another reason why a lot of people still don't know about us because we've had to hide. I mean, it was illegal to practice our ceremonies up until 1977, not very long ago. So, we have been a people that we've had to hide, we feared punishment, we feared, we had ancestors that were jailed, that were murdered for just believing what we have always believed, what the Creator gave us. Yeah, we believed in a Creator as well that gave us ways of being, and so those very core things about us, we've had to hide and protect. So I think many times people still don't understand us very well. And we have a different communication style. This is a little bit different for some of us because when you speak to some of our elders, they're very thoughtful. We're here to speak on issues. But if you go visit an elder, you're going to get a little bit of information over a period of time. And what they give you, they have already put a lot of thought into what they're thinking, and they're going to give you that a little at a time. So, we're dealing with a society that maybe has a different communication style as well, where we're not maybe always aggressive. And so, but I've worked very hard to understand my identity and hold on to it and not give it up as an adult. And then I have brought my 14-year-old son up in a very Cherokee-centered way, in a way that he defends us now as well, respectfully. Mm-hmm. We've been taught, to be respectful of other people. And so I think it's just, again, education over time, but be passionate about it. Be respectful, but be passionate and be compassionate because, again, all of this comes down to ignorance. Again, what is ignorance? We just don't know. Ignorance, again, has a negative kind of connotation, but ignorance meaning we just don't fully understand something. So we need to help one another understand those things. As I look around the room, we have different complexions, we have different male, female, different backgrounds, different ways of being, transgender, that's good, that's okay. Here in this campus, in this building that started out as a place for Cherokee women. Here, and that's not going to change unless things get crazy in DC, but, let's hope we don't go in that direction, but diversity is the way it is.
Well, that reminds me too, when thinking about this panel and mascot issues, is so many people simplify it as a native versus a non-native issue, but it's a lot more complicated than that. Even my experience with my spouse, who is a white and Anglo-American man, and he grew up as well in the DC area, and he went with me and spoke to the Wisconsin state legislature, who was trying to make a decision about Indian mascots. And he gave his testimony in defense of changing Indian mascots, and being in support of what other people would say, well, that's a native stance. But as shared before, it's a lot more complicated. You have, even within Native American communities, internal relations to this, and also within diverse communities, that I think it also comes back to values. What do people value, and how's their relation to it, and what values do they want to uphold? Okay, we have one comment there.
She had a comment.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Norma.
Well, I see everyone talking about football, baseball, basketball. Well, I like soccer, and I don't know, does anybody in here like soccer? Well, in soccer, they don't even have mascots, so why can't the other sports be like that? Like, my favorite team is Columbia. That's my national favorite team. It's not Columbia anything, it's just Team Columbia. So why can't we do that? Why can't they be just OU or OSU? I was like, it would get rid of all the mascots. Too easy.
Some ideas there. I know you were waiting in the middle. I'm sorry to hear some. Yeah.
I was just saying, like, I was going to ask them if they had ideas on what could happen. Like, I know these kids in here with the sequoia and the voya and has the arrow. I don't remember, you guys didn't really have an actual mascot besides the arrow, did you?
Yeah, I remember, I feel like at one point people would, the teachers there would talk about that there was a mascot at one point, that like a guy would dress up like in a headdress and bring like a sphere or something, but then it kind of, like, I wasn't there for any of that, but I know it was just a sphere.
So they kind of just like
faded him out.
Yeah.
So that was good. But like, it is hard because you do go to like you guys' football games and they do the drum, and like you see other schools and other kids just, doing the war cries that are not even part of that school, they're just kind of making fun of it. So, but my question was like, what could we do to possibly kind of help other schools that still have, like, still Indians, my other school still, they still have on their shirts Indians and stuff like that.
I have to say too, we're talking about Fort Gibson and their recent offense, but I remember Stillwell sometime, not too long ago, they're the Indians, and they had a mascot that was considered offensive, and they did not want to change it. And so again, this issue is broad, and it's at the local level all the way up again to the Redskins in DC, and so there is a lot to discuss. I think we need to plan. I think, my work is as a cultural outreach officer at the Cherokee Nation, and please know that my opinions today don't reflect the entirety of the Cherokee Nation, because quite frankly, I know they don't. But I think we just have a lot more work to do, and it's going to take more of us to do it. I'm one person in my little department, and so I try to reach as many people as I can respectfully about, educating about the culture, but it's just going to take all of us to become more informed and be more communicative, I think, with our schools and our communities. So
thank you. Okay, we are running out of time, so we have enough. I saw 3 hands up. In order was one in the back there, and then the madam in the back there, and Mary here. So go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. I see faces that are really nice, so I'm struggling because I'm up there today. But I just want to say, the comment earlier about the $2,000 with the T-shirts left. I see a bunch of Native faces in this room. I know when I took class this year, my contribution was well over $2,000. So, and then yesterday, Chief Baker himself said this school has produced, or it has the largest student body, Native American student body in the entire United States. So I think our contribution to this university outweighs a $2,000 stock. If that was a statement, I don't know whether in that conversation, I take what you're saying is true. That's absurd.
And then someone in the back, your comment last with Mary.
I think that if we could get the state to come up with a new plan for having Indian history required, it had to be required to graduate, and start it from kindergarten on. That would help get some education done, and train the teachers on Indian education, what they need to know. That would be a good start there. As for the Redskins, my granddaughter is in first grade, and last year her teacher wanted to have a little game at the end of the week, which had to deal with Redskins. Karis is an 8th Choctaw, and so she stood in front of her class and she says, "This is wrong. It's all wrong." And the kids, there's various ethnic groups that's in her class. They live in Arlington, Virginia, and she said, they said, "No, it's right. It's perfectly right. It's the Redskins." She says, "No, we are not red, and it is wrong." So there are still young people that are fighting for it.
Yes, that's great.
And then Mary. And then you'll be the last.
I'm getting over a cold, so if I need to speak louder, just tell me. But I attended a sovereignty symposium this summer in Oklahoma City, and it included all the attorneys, judicial branch of the system. I went to a workshop on education, and in that particular workshop, there's a lady who's from this area. She's Cherokee. Her name is Melody McCoy, and she works at the Native American Rights Fund. What she talked about is that every tribe in every state of the United States has a right to consult with any institution that is located near them. Some states are really working hard on it, and she named about 5 different states. I think Minnesota. So when we talk about what can we do, and with this issue of Fort Gibson, I was really surprised about that too. We can begin, all the various tribes that are here today, I'm Cherokee and Chickasaw, we can consult with this institution, with the other boards of education. We have a right to do that. Now, in some states, the institution can listen and apply what the tribes say or not. But legally, we have a right to do that. And I think along with your idea and others here today, I think we've got a lot of voices who can say what we need to do in education and in history and in our curriculum.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank our.
Oh,
sure, we have to wrap.
And I retired 3 years ago, and I guess it was probably 4 years ago, a student came to me, and we were playing still Indians here, and he said, "I find the signs offensive that are in these buildings." And I said, "I haven't been out of my office yet, so let's go look." We did, and it was saying scalp the Indians, all that beat the Indians, torture the Indians. And so we went to the principal, and I think there was probably an oversight in what happened last weekend, probably from the administration, because we did talk to the principal, and he said, well, you need to talk to student council. They're responsible for putting the signs up. So we did do that. And by the time we left her office, the signs were all gone. So I think somebody did not catch it. They did not have, they need maybe a new rule that they need to have approval of what their floats are going to be and who's going to be in the parade. And I think that was probably an oversight in the administration.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight. And thank you for our panelists. I know it's now at 4:30, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.